Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. President Donald Trump considers large-scale sanctions and tariffs on Russia until a ceasefire deal is agreed. Meanwhile, Zelenskyy confirms peace talks will take place in Saudi Arabia next week in an attempt to end the war. Trump suspends the 25% tariffs for Mexico and Canada, steadying the markets. And Eurostar cancels trains between Paris and London after an unexploded World War II bomb is discovered near the tracks. To our top story, and President Trump has announced he may impose large-scale sanctions and tariffs on Russia until a ceasefire deal is reached. It's in response to Ukraine using French Mirage jets to fend off an overnight attack from Russia, which targeted its energy infrastructure. It's believed 18 people, including 4 children, were injured in the blast. It comes as President Zelenskyy announces Ukraine is most interested in peace, confirming officials will meet the US in Saudi Arabia next week to discuss ending the war with Russia. Zelenskyy implied relations between the US and Ukraine were back on track following his fiery White House visit. The Crown Prince will meet the Ukrainian leader in Saudi Arabia, but Zelenskyy is not expected at next week's peace talks. Let's go live to Washington now to speak to former US Deputy Envoy Ellie Cohanim. Ellie, thank you so much for joining me. Much appreciated. Let's start with President Trump considering sanctioning and imposing tariffs on Russia. What's prompted this, and is it actually likely to go ahead?
Well, first, thank you for having me on. I am convinced that President Trump will likely have to levy sanctions against Russia. And this is something that President Trump spoke about on the campaign trail. It's something that we saw President Trump very much take action in his first administration, where President Trump really uses the levers of economic power to affect policy that he likes to have happen in the world. President Trump really understands how to use economic power and use the United States power to achieve what he wants to see get done in the world.
Peace talks to end the war in Ukraine will take place in Saudi Arabia next week. Ellie, what exactly can we expect from these talks?
Well, I think the Trump administration hopes to see real progress come out of these talks. Again, President Trump campaigned in the United States when he was running for president that he was going to bring peace back to the world. He left the Biden administration a world that was at peace. And unfortunately, he's inherited a world where there's war going on 2 continents. And this is something that President Trump is very much dedicated to, ending these conflicts, ending these wars. And what he wants is immediate ceasefires effected on both of these continents. So that's what we're seeing right now play out in Gaza, and that's what he's working towards between Ukraine and Russia. So again, he's very dedicated to, first of all, bringing about immediate ceasefires, and then trying to create a deal between Russia and Ukraine that will withstand the test of time. And so this is what we can expect that everybody will be working towards in this upcoming summit in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Yes, indeed. And as we did mention, Ellie, Zelenskyy will not be present for those talks. Who will be representing Ukraine, the US and Russia?
You know, I'm not exactly sure myself who's representing the Ukrainian and Russian side. On the U.S. side, we've had a number of U.S. Administration officials from the new Trump administration who are dedicated to the Russia talks, the Russia-Ukraine talks. So that's everybody from Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. We've seen him participate in some portion of these talks. There is General Keith Kellogg, who is the Special Envoy for Russia-Ukraine and served under President Trump in the first administration, a very trusted figure to President Trump. He has met a number of times with different officials. I would expect to see General Keith Kellogg there. And then there's been others who have participated in different portions of these talks. So that's what I would expect from the American side. And again, I think that the American mandate is very clear. They are seeing this very much as a two-step process. First, we want an immediate ceasefire. Secondly, let's work towards a deal that that will make sure that in the future we don't see any continued incursions from Putin and from Russia into other European states.
Ellie, there was a ceasefire breakthrough for Israel, Gaza in Saudi Arabia. Are we hoping for a similar success between Russia and Ukraine? It seemed to have been successful.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, you know, you're looking at two different conflicts with a lot of very different dynamics between these two conflicts. But again, I think from the American side, the idea is that specifically on Russia, Ukraine, why President Trump and his administration are very dedicated to this issue right now is that, as you heard President Trump say in that meeting to Zelenskyy at the White House, he's concerned about that conflict, that war, the potential for it not only to become a greater regional war, but in fact, World War III is what President Trump said in that meeting to Zelenskyy. And so the U.S. administration is highly, highly dedicated to making sure that this conflict is contained and ultimately resolved.
Let's just talk about Zelenskyy's fiery meeting at the White House. I can't believe it was a week ago. It feels like a lot's happened since then. That will obviously go down in the history books. Do you believe this relationship can actually be healed?
Well, I want to stay a moment on what you said about that meeting going down in the history books. I think it's going to go down in the history books of a colossal failure of diplomacy. You know, everything that one should not do is what Zelenskyy did. And just to review for the audience, you know, what happened in that meeting is that you see President Zelenskyy come into the United States White House and meeting with the President of the United States, the Vice President, and the administration, and showing a complete lack of respect for the President of the United States, who, you know, our country has given Ukraine billions of dollars of support and really propped them up in this war. And so there was just a complete lack of diplomacy, a complete lack of protocol displayed. And again, Zelenskyy did everything wrong, it seems like, that he could have possibly done. Now, in terms of repairing the rupture, it has been a very big priority for President Trump and the administration that Zelenskyy signed the minerals deal with the United States. And the reason for that is that because the United States, once this deal is signed, the United States has a stake in Ukraine's future. We have an economic stake in their future that also would, you know, benefit the United States. So this would move on from the relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine being one of pure benevolence to one where the U.S. actually has skin in the game, as they say, right? We would be invested in Ukraine. And so I think that ultimately for Zelenskyy to truly repair the relationship, he needs to very much consider the deal that's being offered to him and ultimately needs to sign the deal. I do think that the relationship can be salvaged. And we heard President Trump at his State of the Union address the other night read a letter from Zelenskyy to the American people, to the U.S. Congress at that address. And so I think we're on the path, very much so, to repair the relationship.
And finally, Donald Trump is actually holding the first crypto summit at the White House today. Tell us why this has become so important to the US president. He's sort of changed tone on crypto.
Yeah, I think President Trump views crypto as the future of finance. I think he believes that this is a direction that the world is moving towards anyway. And so we don't want to leave the United States behind. And this is something that we're seeing from President Trump, you know, in every angle, is that he wants to make sure that American interests are always preserved, right? And so that's what America First policy is all about. America First policy is always making sure that the American interest is secured and preserved. So, you know, that's what we're seeing, I think, with crypto as well. And as long as there is a belief that this is important for the U.S. economy, I'm sure we're going to continue to see the Trump administration working on it.
Ellie, Cohanim, it was absolutely wonderful to have you on the show and your insights. Former US Deputy Envoy, thank you once again.
Thank you for having me.
President Trump has suspended the 25% tariffs intended on goods from Canada and Mexico. The decision has calmed worries about inflation and growth in an ongoing trade war. Canada will also delay their second retaliatory tariffs of US products, but their first round will remain.
And I spoke to the president of Mexico, wonderful woman, today, and we helped them out with the problem they were having to do with the tariffs, short-term tariffs. And we had a very good conversation. Also, we discussed drugs, and they've been working much harder lately. Do you notice that? On people coming in and drugs, and we've made tremendous progress on both.
There we go, President Trump talking about the tariffs there. We can now go live to our correspondent, Toni Waterman in Austin, Texas, who can give us more insight on this. Toni, how long do we believe the suspension will last for, and could they go ahead eventually?
Well, the pause is supposed to be in effect until April 2nd, so a reprieve of less than a month, and essentially just kicking the can down the road and leaving consumers and companies in this great state of limbo. It's also very important to point out that the carve-outs only apply to goods that are shipped under the USMCA. This is this North American trade pact that Trump negotiated during his first term in office. So it covers things like TVs and air conditionings, avocados and beef, but it does not apply to every single item. And in fact, a White House official has said that about 50% of the goods imported from Mexico and about 62% of the goods imported from Canada could still be subjected to tariffs. So we're talking about billions and billions of dollars worth of trade every single week. One example of that is potash. This is a very key ingredient in fertilizer that American farmers are heavily reliant on, and that tariff remains. It's been reduced from 25% down to 10%, but it remains in place. Also, these retaliatory tariffs of $22 billion that Canada has placed on American goods also are going to remain in place until April 2nd. They are delaying that second round, which was much larger than the first round, as they try to figure out what exactly the next moves are for Donald Trump. But the president has indicated that he is still very much in favor of these tariffs. In fact, on his social media platform, Truth Social, this morning, he posted that he agreed with people that say that tariffs are necessary, particularly in the car making space. So there is a good chance that these tariffs could ultimately take effect on April 2nd. And don't forget, it's not just these tariffs on Mexico and Canada, but we are anticipating that the White House is going to unveil its reciprocal tariffs for all of its global trade partners on April 2nd. So this has the potential to become a much wider spread issue.
Toni, what do you actually think changed Trump's mind when it came to making this latest decision on tariffs?
You know, he hasn't said exactly what changed his mind, but Trump is a businessman. He watches the markets very closely, and he's incredibly sensitive to any sort of backward slide in the markets. And since he introduced these tariffs just on Tuesday, the markets have absolutely tanked. Businesses hate uncertainty. It is the kryptonite of business to not know what's going to be happening. They don't know where to place their money right now. They don't know where to redirect their supply chains. They don't know what sort of costs should be passed along to consumers to be able to maintain demand. So in particular, the car makers in the U.S. have been hit really, really hard. GM, Ford, Stellantis, because they have these supply chains that are very integrated with Canada and with Mexico. So it's not uncommon that you'll have a car assembled in the U.S., but the guts of that car are manufactured in Canada and in Mexico. And often these parts are crossing over borders 5-6 times before the car is actually completed. So the car industry also got this reprieve a day before this pause was put in effect for more items. But it just creates a lot of uncertainty. And it's not just these tariffs on Mexico and Canada, because on Tuesday, the White House also announced an additional 10% tariff on Chinese goods. And when you put those three countries together, those are the U.S.'s top 3 trade partners.
Toni, Waterman in Austin, Texas, thank you so much for joining me. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Forces loyal to Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa have been clashing with groups linked to the ousted President Bashar al-Assad. A war monitor says at least 70 people are dead in the fighting. Violence began after government forces were ambushed during a security operation in Latakia. 3 people have been found guilty of spying for Russia from a seaside guest house in Great Yarmouth in the UK. One of their tasks was to gather information about dissidents and prominent individuals of interest to the Russians. Scotland Yard said the spy ring carried out espionage on an industrial scale. Thousands in Australia are being told to evacuate ahead of tropical cyclone Alfred. It's expected to hit land as a Category 2 storm north of Brisbane. Winds of over 100 kilometres per hour hit the coastal regions of Queensland and New South Wales overnight. Some areas have lost power and several flights have been cancelled. And finally, Lady Gaga's new album, Mayhem, has just been released today. It marks the Grammy winner's 7th studio LP. Some critics say the new music resembles the artist's original sound and marks a return to the old Gaga albums. Eurostar cancelled all services between London and Paris today after the discovery of an unexploded World War II bomb. Thousands of passengers were affected and trains were suspended from the Gare du Nord station. Bomb disposal experts were deployed after overnight workers found the antique bomb near the train tracks. Services are now expected to resume on Saturday. Sarah Firth has the story.
Waiting, waiting, waiting. That's how one passenger described the frustration at today's delays at Paris's Gare du Nord train station after the discovery of an unexploded bomb dating back to World War II.
Et je pars en Allemagne à Cologne.
I'm going to Germany, to Cologne. I arrived at 5:30 and my train was at 7:45 and it was cancelled because supposedly there was a bomb. And I asked, and they said it was Hitler's fault because he put bombs everywhere.
Trains at a standstill at the world's 3rd busiest train station. Paris police say the bomb was discovered at 3:30 a.m. local time in the Parisian suburb of Saint-Denis. And the disruption hasn't just impacted national commuter rails in France. International train services have been disrupted, including the Eurostar.
I've heard it on the news that it happens sometimes, that things like this were found. But we said to ourselves, we've had really bad luck here. It's a pretty weird situation.
The French transport minister saying the disruption was expected to continue for at least the rest of the day. Passengers being directed away by police as a security line is set up.
500 mètres à partir de ce point, merci.
Frustration and confusion for many people travelling by train today, as this old and dangerous weapon from the past causes a very modern-day disruption. Sarah Firth, Al Arabiya.
Let's take another look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Pope Francis has shared a short voice message from hospital. It was played during a nightly prayer service in St. Peter's Square at the Vatican. The 88-year-old, who's been diagnosed with pneumonia in both lungs and suffered from a respiratory failure, thanked people across the world for their support. Thailand has abolished a strict hairstyle code for students in Thailand after 50 years. The Education Ministry had previously only allowed short hair for boys and ear-length bobs for girls. The latest move may allow schools to set the rule, but the ministry encourages students to make the choice. A bill to stop children doom scrolling on social media could get government backing over in the UK. It's been put forward by a Labour MP calling for tougher restrictions on teenagers spending hours a week on apps like TikTok and Snapchat. And King Charles has revealed some of his favourite music whilst launching a project for Commonwealth Day. The King's personal playlist will be published on Monday and features artists like Bob Marley, Kylie Minogue and also Grace Jones. His Majesty said he's sharing songs from Commonwealth countries which have brought him joy. Fabulous playlist there. Now, two NASA astronauts currently stuck on the International Space Station will return home in a few weeks' time. Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams have been in space for the last 9 months after taking off from the Starliner capsule last June. The pair were only scheduled to be gone for a week, but the capsule experienced so many problems getting to the space station, NASA ruled it too dangerous to carry any passengers back to Earth. SpaceX are now coordinating to bring the astronauts back. One person who can tell us more is retired NASA astronaut turned author, Dr. Cady Coleman, who joins us now. Cady, thank you so much for joining me. You've been on board the International Space Station. Explain to us what it's like there, and is spending 9 months there pretty much unimaginable?
Well, it's an unimaginable dream to spend 9 months there. I spent almost 6 months there and would have spent another 6 months, partly because the work that we do up there, it's really clear, especially when you're up there, that every single experiment data point that you are collecting, which are experiments about going further in space, but really experiments that mean something back here on Earth, like growing food and understanding pollution and all sorts of really important things. So the work is important, but it's also we have a little tiny bit of gravity, but literally without gravity, life is different. And, we can do a lot of experiments, but we also get to literally fly everywhere. Like my hair, if anybody looks online, you'll see pictures of my hair being about this big up there. And it just reminds you that you're in a place that is really special, and the things that you discover, you're discovering for everybody back here on Earth. So I do know Sunny and Butch, and I know that they are so excited about spending a long time up there instead of 8 days.
Absolutely, but there have been some concerns about their health on board the International Space Station. They've come out to confirm that they are doing well. Is this something that people should be worried about?
They absolutely should not. And it's very interesting to me, and actually kind of wonderful in a way, when people pay attention to Sonny and Butch's situation, where it's just something that people can relate to. They can relate to maybe being somewhere unexpected and not being able to come home. When really, the way this happened, coming home on their ship was not the safest way. And it's not so much that it was a great danger, but it was not the safest way. And even though it caused a lot of, hassles, it was the best idea safety-wise, and also for the good of the program for getting work done, to have Sonny and Butch stay up there. And then actually the next ship that was regularly scheduled came up with 2 people instead of 4, so that when it returns, it would return with all 4 of them. So they've actually never been stranded, but it's interesting what you asked about their health. From what I understand, and I am somebody that we're all a family of astronauts, we all know each other. From what I understand, they've been in wonderful health the whole time, but I think it's really great that the world is so concerned about them.
We can all read about your career and experience in a new book, Sharing Space, An Astronaut's Guide to Mission, Wonder and Making Change. Why did you decide to write it, and what can readers expect? What can we get when we have a flick through your new novel?
Well, I did feel really privileged to be up there. I loved it. And I literally wanted to share my experiences up there, the wonder of living in space, the honor of being part of the mission that is more important than you are, that is helping to explore space. And also stories that I have to say, unfortunately still happen to people who walk into an environment and may not sort of look and sound like most of the people who work there. And that includes, being an astronaut at NASA. And so I share some of those stories because for me, when I would find out that's moving more slowly than we thought. And, they still don't remember that. I don't know. I don't even have really good examples that are short to say, but, let's just say that it's a little bit harder in some environments to be recognized for the talents that you bring to the mission. And I loved literally every day that I spent there, and the people that I went to space with and worked with. And at the same time, changing the world so that we include everyone's perspective so that we can solve challenging problems. That's what we need to do. And I'd like to think that the stories in my book help do that.
Katy Perry and Gayle King have signed up for an all-woman mission for the next Blue Origin space flight this spring. Such a diverse group of women going up to space, which is pretty incredible. What would your best advice be to them, and how to prepare themselves to go to space?
Well, I am so glad that they are going, and that, people who have some fame down here on Earth, when they come to the space world, other people look into the space world that might not have. And I would tell Cady and Gayle and Amanda and Aisha, the whole crew, it happens even if you spend a bunch of months up there. It happens very quickly, and make sure that you just sort of close your eyes and capture some moments that are just for you, or keep your eyes wide open, looking at that view out the window, and capture what it really feels like to be a person doing that. Because I think it's sort of unbelievable, and it's hard when you come home to remember you really got to do this amazing experience. And I know they're all so excited and actually intent on sharing that experience when they get home.
And what do you think of the fact that they're all been women from very different backgrounds, some from the music industry, so it's very diverse. Do you think it will encourage more young ladies who are watching you right now to follow in your footsteps?
Absolutely. And for me, it made a big difference. I never thought about being an astronaut until I met Sally Ride when I was in college. And now millions of, girls and boys are going to see, for example, Katy Perry go to space, someone that they've admired, they like her music or they don't like her music. Either way, girls and boys are going to see that women going to space is something that happens as well. And I think of each person that goes to space as creating sort of ripples in a pond, and in the pond of sort of us. And the fact that we're sending 6 very different women who actually I think have one thing in common, which is they not only have really unique professions, but they also work outside their professions, have perspectives. And I think they're very intent on making sure that they share this experience, and that is so valuable to all of us for solving tomorrow's challenges.
And Elon Musk has suffered another setback with his SpaceX rocket launch this week. What do you make of the race to space by the millionaires like Elon Musk? We're just talking about Jeff Bezos there, and Richard Branson. And will space travel become attainable to the masses anytime soon? Will I be able to go up there in my lifetime?
Well, I would certainly sign up as soon as you get a chance, okay, on any one of them. I really would. I think that, and in fact, I know that each of these, these 3 people with resources and different resources, different visions, they each have their own way of paving the way to space. And I don't, when you said soon, will it happen soon that, thousands and thousands of people will go? I don't think soon by anybody's definition, but it does look like life is changing. And by doing, Elon's approach with the Starship is, I think, quite clever in terms of being able to, he's built things in such a way that he can afford, and I don't just mean money, but resources, to try things and see how far they get, learn something from that, and try again. And it's always disappointing to see the rocket blow up at a certain stage, but you have to realize that there is a lot that they're learning for every second that those engines are firing. And so there's all these different approaches combined, hopefully, to you and I going to space together someday.
Oh, I'd love to go to space with you. I was just thinking that if I'd met you in college, maybe I would have chosen a different career because you're so inspiring. Dr. Cady Coleman.
I know you inspire here too.
Thank you so much for joining me. It was absolutely wonderful to have you on the show. That was Dr. Cady Coleman, retired NASA astronaut. Let's take a look at the top business news now. President Trump plans to make the US the crypto capital of the world, signing an executive order to establish a strategic reserve for Bitcoin. America will become one of the few countries in the world to create a national stockpile of blockchain assets. Further details are expected at the first crypto summit at the White House today. The US owner of the Boots, a pharmacy chain, is being taken over by a private equity firm in a $10 billion deal. The price being paid for Walgreens Boots Alliance is a fraction of what the company was worth a decade ago, reflecting its struggles with growing debt and shoppers going online. There have been reports that the Boots chain could be sold off separately by its new owner, private equity firm Sycamore Partners. And turning to the sports news now. Football's governing body, FIFA, will review a proposal to expand the 2030 World Cup to 64 teams to mark the centenary of the sports event. The 2030 World Cup will be held in Morocco, Spain and Portugal, with Argentina, Paraguay and Uruguay. The World Cup has already been expanded from 32 to 48 teams for next year's edition in the US, Mexico and also Canada. And tennis teen Joao Fonseca continues his stunning rise with the first round win at Indian Wells over in California. Fonseca, who's just 18 years old, rallied from a breakdown in the third set to beat Britain's Jacob Fernley on his Indian Wells debut. Meanwhile, Nick Kyrgios was in tears as he retired injured from his first round match. A reminder of our top stories. President Donald Trump considers large-scale sanctions and tariffs on Russia until a ceasefire deal is agreed. Meanwhile, Zelenskyy confirms peace talks will take place in Saudi Arabia next week in an attempt to end the war. After suspending the 25% tariffs for Mexico and Canada yesterday, President Trump threatens reciprocal tariffs against the Canadians. And Eurostar cancels trains between Paris and London after an unexploded World War II bomb is discovered near the tracks. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. Riz Khan is coming up next. And do not miss Tom Burgess-Watson with G&T. Good night and happy Friday.